Jake Miller wiped the sweat from his forehead and checked his watch. 3 hours into his desert hike and the Arizona sun was already getting brutal. He'd started before dawn, just like he always did on his days off from the ambulance service. The Sonoran Desert was his escape from the chaos of emergency calls and hospital runs. Out here, the only sounds were his boots crunching on gravel and the occasional call of a hawk circling overhead. He pulled out his water bottle and took a long drink. The trail ahead curved around a massive boulder formation, disappearing into shadows that promised a brief respite from the heat. Jake had been hiking this particular route for 5 years, ever since he'd moved to Phoenix for his EMT job. He knew every twist and turn, every landmark and shortcut. This was supposed to be his peaceful morning ritual. That's when he heard it. A sound that didn't belong in the desert silence. "Help! Someone! Please!" The voice was weak, barely carrying on the dry morning air. Jake froze, straining his ears. For a moment he wondered if he'd imagined it. Desert hiking could play tricks on your mind sometimes, but then he heard it again. "Help me." His EMT training kicked in immediately. Jake dropped his backpack and pulled out his radio, knowing full well there wouldn't be any signal out here. The nearest cell tower was 15 miles away, and the rocky terrain made radio communication nearly impossible. Still, he tried. "Base, this is Jake Miller, badge number 4821. I've got a possible emergency situation on the hieroglyphic trail, approximately 3 miles from the trailhead. No response to radio contact, static. Nothing but static." Jake clipped the radio back to his belt and followed the sound of the voice. It was coming from somewhere beyond the boulder formation, off the main trail. He moved carefully, watching for loose rocks and the telltale diamond pattern that meant rattlesnakes were in the area. "Keep calling out," he shouted. "I'm coming to help you." The response was weaker this time, but it gave him direction. Jake scrambled over a low ridge and spotted her. A woman was sitting against a large rock about 50 yards away. One leg stretched out in front of her at an odd angle. Even from a distance, he could see something was very wrong. As he got closer, his heart sank. The woman's right leg was swollen to nearly twice its normal size, the skin discolored and tight. 2 small puncture wounds were visible just above her ankle, surrounded by angry red inflammation that was spreading up her calf. Jake had seen this before too many times during his 6 years as an EMT rattlesnake bite. "Ma'am, I'm Jake. I'm a paramedic," he called out as he approached. "I'm going to help you, okay?" The woman looked up at him with glazed eyes. She appeared to be in her late 40s, with short brown hair plastered to her head with sweat. Her hiking gear was expensive looking, the kind of stuff you'd see in outdoor magazines, but it looked almost too clean for someone who should have been hiking for hours to get this far out. "It bit me," she whispered. "The snake. It came out of nowhere. I couldn't move after." Jake knelt beside her and immediately began his assessment. Her pulse was rapid and thready, her breathing shallow. Classic signs of systemic envenomation. Her skin was pale and clammy despite the desert heat. "How long ago did this happen?" he asked, already knowing the answer wouldn't be good. Maybe 2 hours, 3. I lost track of time." Her words were slightly slurred. "I tried to call for help, but my phone..." She gestured weakly toward the expensive-looking smartphone lying shattered on the rocks nearby. "Dropped it when I fell. 3 hours." Jake's mind raced through the protocols. In a hospital setting, antivenom would be administered within the first 4 hours for optimal effectiveness. Out here, they were at least 4 hours from the nearest medical facility, even if he could somehow signal for helicopter evacuation. "What's your name?" he asked, pulling medical supplies from the small first aid kit he always carried. "Victoria," she managed. "Victoria." "Am I going to die?" "Not if I have anything to say about it," Jake replied, trying to project confidence he didn't entirely feel. "Victoria, I need you to stay as calm as possible. Try not to move that leg. I'm going to do everything I can to help you, but I need you to work with me." He examined the bite site more closely. The fang marks were clear, and the pattern of swelling suggested a significant envenomation. Victoria was lucky in one respect. The bite was on her leg rather than somewhere closer to vital organs. But the amount of swelling and her deteriorating condition told him this was serious. Jake quickly fashioned a loose tourniquet from his spare bandana, placing it several inches above the bite site. Not tight enough to cut off circulation completely, but snug enough to slow the spread of venom through her lymphatic system. "This might be uncomfortable," he warned. checking her pulse below the tourniquet. Still present but weak. I can't feel my leg anymore, Victoria mumbled. That's not normal, is it? The venom affects nerve function, Jake explained, keeping his voice steady. It's temporary. The important thing is that we get you to a hospital as soon as possible. He looked around, assessing their situation. They were in a canyon, surrounded by rocky walls on 3 sides. The trail was narrow and treacherous. Even if he could get a signal, it would take time for rescue personnel to reach them. Time Victoria might not have. Jake had 2 options. Leave her here while he ran for help or try to carry her out himself. Leaving her meant she'd be alone for at least 2 hours, possibly more. Her condition could deteriorate rapidly in that time, but attempting to carry someone through miles of desert terrain, especially someone showing signs of severe envenomation, was extremely risky for both of them. Victoria, I need to ask you something important, he said, checking her pupils. They were slightly dilated but still reactive. How did you get out here? Are you hiking alone? Yes, she whispered. I needed to get away from everything. Clear my head. I do this every year. Every year? You're familiar with desert hiking? Not really. I usually stick to easier trails. But I wanted to push myself this time. Stupid, I guess, Jake frowned. Something didn't add up. Her gear was top of the line, but she moved like someone who wasn't comfortable in the outdoors. And despite claiming to be an experienced yearly hiker, she'd made several basic mistakes that had put her in danger. But those questions would have to wait. Right now, his priority was getting Victoria to safety. Okay, here's what we're going to do, Jake said, making his decision. I'm going to carry you out of here. It's going to be tough on both of us, but I think it's our best option. Victoria's eyes widened. You can't. I'm too heavy. You'll hurt yourself. I've carried people before, Jake assured her, and you're not going anywhere on that leg. Just focus on staying conscious and breathing. Normally, he began preparing for what he knew would be the most challenging rescue of his career. Jake positioned himself behind. Victoria carefully slipped his arms under hers. This is going to hurt a bit, he warned. Try to keep your bitten leg as still as possible. Victoria nodded weakly. I trust you. Those 3 words hit Jake harder than he expected. Here was a complete stranger putting her life in his hands, and he wasn't even sure he could pull this off. He'd carried people before, but never through miles of desert terrain with someone fighting off snake venom. He lifted her slowly, feeling her full weight settle onto his back. She was heavier than she looked, but not impossibly so. The real challenge would be maintaining his balance on the rocky trail while conserving enough energy to make it all the way back. How are you doing back there? He asked after the first 100 yards. Dizzy, Victoria mumbled against his shoulder. Everything's spinning. Jake felt her grip on his shoulders loosen slightly. Hey, stay with me, Victoria. Keep talking. Tell me about yourself. What do you want to know? Her voice was getting weaker. Anything. Where do you live? What do you do for work? Jake stepped carefully over a fallen branch, his legs already starting to feel the strain. I run a company. Technology stuff. Computers and software. She paused, breathing heavily. Board meeting tomorrow. Actually, today. What time is it? Jake checked his watch. It's almost 10 in the morning. Victoria made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. They're going to be so angry. The quarterly reports. I was supposed to present the quarterly reports. I'm sure they'll understand when you explain what happened, Jake replied, though something about the way she talked about her job struck him as odd. Most people would say they worked at a tech company, not that they ran one, but then again, snake venom could make people say strange things. The trail began to climb upward, winding around a series of large boulders. Jake's breathing became labored as he navigated the incline. Sweat poured down his face and his shirt was already soaked through. The Arizona sun was getting higher, and the temperature was climbing toward the dangerous zone. The stock price, Victoria mumbled suddenly. Oh God, the stock price. If the investors find out I'm missing. Victoria, you're not making much sense, Jake said, pausing to catch his breath in the shade of a large rock formation. Just focus on staying conscious, okay? You don't understand, she said, her words slurring more now. $12 billion. $12 billion. That's what they said it's worth. But it's not real money. Not like this. Not like you helping me. Jake frowned. $12 billion. The venom was definitely affecting her thinking. He'd heard delirious patients say all kinds of things. that they were secretly celebrities, that they owned mansions, that they were related to famous people. The mind played tricks when the body was under severe stress. Save your strength, he told her gently. We've got a long way to go. As they continued along the trail, Victoria's condition seemed to fluctuate. Sometimes she would mumble incoherently about meetings and contracts and something called the acquisition. Other times, she would be completely silent, her breathing so shallow that Jake had to stop and check that she was still conscious. The worst moment came about 2 hours into their journey. They were crossing a particularly narrow section of trail with a steep drop off to one side, when Victoria suddenly went completely limp. "Victoria!" Jake called out, nearly losing his balance. "Victoria, wake up!" No response. He could feel her breathing, but it was slow and irregular. Jake carefully lowered them both to the ground, his heart pounding. This was exactly what he'd been afraid of. The venom was affecting her respiratory system. He checked her pulse. Still there, but weaker than before. Her lips had a slight blue tinge that hadn't been there earlier. Jake knew the signs. Without medical intervention soon, she might not make it. "Come on," he said, lifting her again. "Don't you dare give up on me now." His back was screaming in pain and his legs felt like jelly. But something about Victoria's trust in him, her quiet dignity even while delirious, made him push forward. He'd never left a patient behind in 6 years as an EMT, and he wasn't about to start now. The trail began to descend toward the parking area, which should have made things easier. But Jake's exhausted legs struggled with the downward slope, and several times he nearly lost his footing on loose gravel. "The employees," Victoria whispered suddenly, startling him. She'd been quiet for almost an hour. 15,000 employees. What happens to them if something happens to me? "Nothing's going to happen to you," Jake said firmly. "We're almost there. Promise me," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in a while. "If something happens, promise me you'll tell someone. Tell them to take care of the employees. They have families." Jake didn't understand what she was talking about, but the urgency in her voice was real. "I promise. But you're going to be fine. You're going to tell them yourself." As they rounded the final bend before the ranger station, Jake saw the most beautiful sight of his life. A white pickup truck with emergency lights flashing. Someone had spotted his distress signal after all. "Help!" he shouted, his voice cracking with exhaustion. "Medical emergency!" "Snakebite!" 2 park rangers ran toward them, followed by what looked like a paramedic crew. Jake had never been so happy to see his fellow first responders. "How long since the bite?" asked the lead paramedic as they carefully transferred Victoria to a stretcher. "About 5 hours, Jake replied, collapsing onto a nearby bench. His legs were shaking from exhaustion. 5 hours? And you carried her how far?" 3 miles, maybe 4. "Through the canyon trail." The paramedic whistled low. "That's some serious hiking, brother. You might have saved her life. We've got a helicopter coming in now." As the medical team worked on Victoria, starting an IV and preparing her for transport, she grabbed Jake's hand with surprising strength. "Thank you," she whispered. "I won't forget this, ever." Before Jake could respond, she was being loaded onto the helicopter. The rotors whipped up clouds of dust as the aircraft lifted off, carrying Victoria toward Phoenix General Hospital. Jake sat alone in the parking lot, watching the helicopter disappear over the mountains. His whole body ached and he was covered in dust and sweat, but there was something satisfying about the morning's work. He'd done his job. He'd saved a life. Little did he know that his quiet life was about to change forever. 3 days later, Jake finally had time to think about the woman he'd rescued. His shifts at the ambulance service had been brutal, back-to-back calls that left him exhausted and sore. But during quiet moments, he found himself wondering about Victoria. How was she recovering? Had the anti-venom worked in time? He'd called the hospital twice, but patient privacy laws meant they couldn't tell him much. All he knew was that she was stable and recovering. It bothered him more than it should have. In 6 years as an EMT, he'd never followed up on patients like this. You did your job, you moved on to the next call. That was how you survived in emergency medicine. But something about carrying Victoria through those miles of desert had created a connection he couldn't shake. Maybe it was the way she'd trusted him completely, or how she'd worried about her employees even while fighting for her life. Whatever it was, Jake decided he needed to see for himself that she was okay. Phoenix General Hospital was a maze of corridors and elevators that always made Jake feel lost. He'd been here dozens of times for patient transfers, but finding the right room as a visitor was different. At the information desk, he asked for Victoria's room number. "Victoria what?" asked the volunteer, an elderly woman with kind eyes. Jake realized he'd never gotten her last name. "I'm sorry, I don't know her last name. She was admitted 3 days ago with a snake bite. I'm the person who brought her in." The woman's eyes widened. "Oh my goodness, you're the hero. The one who carried her through the desert." She picked up her phone. "Let me call up to the VIP floor." "They've been hoping you'd come by." "VIP floor?" Jake asked, confused. "Most snakebite patients went to the regular medical ward." "Oh yes, dear. She's in the penthouse suite. Very important lady, apparently. Lots of security around." Jake's stomach dropped. Security? VIP floor? None of this made sense. Victoria had seemed like a regular person. Well, maybe with expensive hiking gear, but still just a person who'd made a mistake in the desert. The elevator ride to the top floor felt like it took forever. When the doors opened, Jake immediately knew he was somewhere different. The hallway looked more like a luxury hotel than a hospital, with art on the walls and fresh flowers on side tables. "Excuse me, sir?" A large man in a dark suit approached him. "Are you authorized to be on this floor?" "I'm here to see Victoria," the woman who was brought in with a snake bite. "I'm Jake Miller, the EMT who found her." The security guard spoke into a small radio. After a brief conversation, his entire demeanor changed. "Mr. Miller, we've been hoping you'd visit. Please follow me." Jake followed the guard down the hallway, passing what looked like a small office setup with multiple people working on laptops and phones. Through an open door, he glimpsed someone who looked like a lawyer reviewing documents. "What's all this?" Jake asked. "Oh, this is just temporary," the guard replied. "Ms. Rodriguez has to keep up with business even while recovering." "Rodriguez?" Jake thought her name was Victoria. Maybe he'd misheard in the desert, or maybe Rodriguez was her last name. But the formal way everyone was treating the situation made him increasingly uncomfortable. They stopped outside a door with 2 more security guards. Jake was starting to feel like he'd walked into the wrong movie. "Jake!" He turned to see Victoria, or whoever she was, walking toward him with a slight limp. She looked completely different than she had in the desert. Her hair was styled, she wore an expensive-looking silk robe, and despite being in a hospital, she somehow managed to look like she belonged on the cover of a business magazine. "I can't believe you came," she said, reaching out to squeeze his arm. "I was hoping I'd get a chance to thank you properly." "You already thanked me," Jake said, still trying to process the scene around him. "I just wanted to make sure you were okay." "More than okay, thanks to you. The doctors said if you'd waited even another hour for help, things could have been very different." Victoria gestured toward her room. "Please come in. We need to talk." Jake followed her into what definitely wasn't a regular hospital room. It looked like a luxury apartment, complete with a sitting area, a desk covered with papers, and multiple phones. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the entire Phoenix Valley spread out below them. "Victoria," Jake began, then stopped. "Is Victoria even your real name?" She smiled, but it looked sad around the edges. "My full name is Victoria Elena Rodriguez, and I owe you an explanation." "You don't owe me anything. I was just doing my job." "That's where you're wrong." Victoria sat down carefully in one of the leather chairs and gestured for Jake to do the same. "Jake, I need you to sit down for this." Something in her tone made Jake's chest tighten with worry. "Are you sicker than they told me? Is there something wrong with your recovery?" No, nothing like that. I'm going to be fine, completely fine. But there are some things about me that you need to know. Especially since..." She picked up a tablet from the side table and handed it to him. This happened. Jake looked at the screen and nearly dropped the tablet. It was a news website, and the headline read, "Billionaire CEO saved by hero EMT in desert rescue." Below it was a photo of Jake carrying Victoria that must have been taken by another hiker with a long-range camera. "I don't understand," Jake said, staring at the screen. "My company, Rodriguez Technologies. Maybe you've heard of it." Jake shook his head. He didn't follow tech companies or business news. "We make software that runs in most of the computers and phones in the world. The company is worth about $12 billion. Victoria's voice was quiet. "I wasn't hallucinating in the desert, Jake. I really do have 15,000 employees. I really was supposed to give a presentation to investors. And now," she gestured at the tablet, Now everyone knows what happened. Jake scrolled through the article, his disbelief growing with every sentence. There were quotes from sources close to Rodriguez Technologies about how the CEO had gone missing during her annual Vision Quest, and how a humble EMT had saved her life. The article mentioned Jake by name, included details about his job, and even had a photo of the ambulance service where he worked. "How did they get all this information about me?" he asked. "Reporters are very good at finding things out quickly," Victoria said apologetically. "I tried to keep your name out of it, but once the Park Service filed their report," Jake kept reading. The comment section was already filling up with hundreds of responses. Some people called him a hero. Others seemed to think the whole thing was suspicious. A few suggested he'd somehow planned the rescue for money or fame. "This is crazy," Jake said, setting the tablet down. "I just helped someone who needed help." "That's it, I know that. But the world doesn't always see things that simply." Victoria leaned forward. "Jake, I'm worried about how this might affect your life. The media attention can be overwhelming." As if on cue, Victoria's phone rang. She glanced at it and frowned. "That's the 5th call from reporters in the last hour. They want interviews, photos, the whole story." Jake stood up quickly. "I should go. This is all way too much for me." "Wait." Victoria stood too, wincing slightly as she put weight on her injured leg. "Please don't leave angry. None of this is your fault. You saved my life, and now I need to find a way to protect you from the chaos that follows me everywhere." Jake paused at the door. "Protect me? I don't need protection. I just need to get back to my normal life." Victoria's expression was sympathetic but sad. "I'm afraid that might not be possible anymore." As Jake walked back toward the elevator, he could hear Victoria's phone ringing again. The security guards nodded respectfully as he passed, but their presence only reminded him of how different their worlds were. In the elevator, Jake stared at his reflection in the polished steel doors. 12 hours ago, he'd been just another EMT doing his job. Now apparently he was front-page news. The elevator reached the ground floor, and as the doors opened, Jake saw something that made his heart sink. A small crowd of people with cameras and microphones was waiting near the hospital's main entrance. His quiet life was officially over. Jake managed to slip out of the hospital through a side entrance, but the damage was already done. By the time he got home to his small apartment, there were 3 news vans parked outside his building. Reporters with cameras waited by his front door like vultures. He drove past his own home and parked 2 blocks away, sneaking in through the back alley. His landlord, Mrs. Peterson, was waiting for him in the hallway. "Jake, thank goodness you're okay," she said, wringing her hands nervously. "These reporters have been knocking on doors all morning asking questions about you. They wanted to know if you're a good tenant, if you pay your rent on time, what kind of person you are." "What did you tell them?" "The truth. That you're quiet, respectful, and you help me carry groceries sometimes." "But Jake," she looked worried. "One of them offered me $500 for a photo of your apartment door." $500 just for a picture. Jake rubbed his temples, feeling a headache coming on. "Did you take it?" "Of course not. But others might. You should be careful." Jake's phone had been buzzing nonstop since he left the hospital. Text messages, missed calls, voicemails from numbers he didn't recognize. He finally turned it off, but the silence felt almost worse than the constant notifications. The next morning, Jake had to report for his regular shift at the ambulance service. He hoped work would provide some normalcy, but as soon as he walked into the station, he knew that hope was foolish. "Well, look who decided to show up," called out Danny, one of the other EMTs, Mr. Famous himself. "It's not like that," Jake said, grabbing his gear from his locker. "Not like what?" "Dude, you're all over the internet. Local hero saves billionaire. Do you know how many views that story has?" Jake's partner for the day, Rodriguez, clapped him on the back. "Man, you should have told us you were connected to rich people. We could have all gotten better jobs by now." "I'm not connected to anyone," Jake protested. "I just helped someone who needed help." "Right," Danny said with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "And I'm sure it's just a coincidence that she happened to be worth $12 billion. The comment stung more than Jake expected. These were his colleagues, people he'd worked alongside for years. They knew him. They should know he wasn't the type of person to plan something like this for personal gain. But as the day went on, it became clear that the story had changed how people saw him. Some coworkers treated him like a celebrity, asking for details about Victoria's house and whether she was really as rich as the news said. Others seemed resentful, as if Jake's 15 minutes of fame somehow made their own work less important. The worst part came during lunch break when Jake overheard two paramedics from another station talking. "I don't buy it," one of them was saying. "Guy just happens to find a billionaire in the middle of nowhere? Sounds fishy to me. Maybe he knew who she was. Maybe he followed her out there. Or maybe she paid him to stage the whole thing for publicity. Rich people do crazy stuff like that all the time." Jake wanted to defend himself, to explain that he'd never even heard of Victoria Rodriguez before that day in the desert. But he realized it wouldn't matter. Once people decided to be suspicious, facts didn't always change their minds. That evening, Jake made the mistake of looking himself up online. The original news story had spawned dozens of others. There were forums where people debated whether his rescue was real. Someone had posted his work schedule and the address of the ambulance station. A few people had even found photos of his apartment building. The comments were brutal. For every person calling him a hero, there was another suggesting he was a fraud, a gold digger, or worse. Some people had created elaborate theories about how he'd planned the whole thing. Others criticized everything from his appearance to his choice of profession. If he was really a hero, why didn't he become a doctor instead of just an EMT? One comment read, "Probably couldn't pass medical school," someone replied. Jake closed his laptop, feeling sick. He'd spent 6 years saving lives, and now strangers on the internet were questioning his motives and intelligence based on a single news story. His phone rang. Jake almost ignored it, but the caller ID showed Victoria's name. "Jake, I hope I'm not disturbing you." "No, it's fine," he lied. "I've been watching the news coverage. I'm so sorry this has gotten out of hand. I never wanted this for you." "It's not your fault," Jake said, though part of him wondered if she could have done more to keep his name out of it. "Actually, it is my fault. The world I live in, everything becomes public eventually. I should have warned you better." Victoria paused. "Jake, I want to do something for you. To make up for all of this chaos. You don't need to do anything." "Yes, I do. I've been thinking about this nonstop. I want to give you a reward for what you did. Something substantial, enough to change your life." Jake sat up straighter. "A reward? Like what?" "Money, a lot of money. Enough that you never have to worry about paying bills again. Enough to buy a house, go back to school if you want. Maybe start that business you've always dreamed about." For a moment, Jake was speechless. He thought about his tiny apartment, his old car that needed constant repairs, his mother's medical bills that kept him up at night worrying. Victoria was offering him a way out of all of that. "How much money?" he asked quietly. $2 million. Jake nearly dropped the phone. $2 million. More money than he'd ever imagined having. More than he'd make in 20 years as an EMT. I can't take that." "Of course you can. You saved my life, Jake. My company makes that much money in about 15 minutes. It's nothing to me, but it could be everything to you." Jake stood up and walked to his small kitchen window, looking out at the news vans that were still parked outside. "People already think I staged this whole thing for money. If you give me millions of dollars, let them think what they want. You and I know the truth." "But I know the truth too," Jake said firmly. "I didn't help you because I thought you were rich. I helped you because you needed help. That's what I do. That's my job." There was silence on the other end of the line. "I can't take your money, Victoria. I won't take it. I'm not for sale. This isn't about buying you, Jake. This is about gratitude." "Then just say thank you. That's enough." Jake heard Victoria sigh. "You're really going to refuse $2 million? "Yes. You're either the most honest person I've ever met or the most stubborn." "Maybe both," Jake said, surprising himself by almost smiling. "Okay," Victoria said finally. "I respect your decision, but Jake, this conversation makes me even more certain that I need to find a way to help you, whether you want it or not." After she hung up, Jake sat in his dark apartment wondering if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. Outside, the reporters were still waiting. 6 months later, Jake's life had mostly returned to normal. The reporters had moved on to Othi. Stories the internet had found new heroes to debate, and his co-workers had stopped making jokes about his 15 minutes of fame. He was back to being just another EMT responding to calls, which was exactly what he wanted. But some things had changed. Jake found himself thinking more about the gaps in emergency response, especially in remote areas like where he'd found Victoria. He'd seen too many cases where people died simply because help couldn't reach them fast enough. During quiet moments at the station, he'd started sketching out ideas for a training center that could teach first responders how to handle rescues in difficult terrain. It was just daydreaming, really. Jake knew he'd never have the money or connections to make something like that happen, but the idea wouldn't leave him alone. One Tuesday morning, Jake got called to the supervisor's office. His boss, Captain Williams, looked unusually formal as he gestured for Jake to sit down. "Jake, I got an interesting phone call yesterday," Williams began. "There's a foundation that wants to offer you a job." "What kind of foundation?" "Emergency response training. They're looking for someone with your experience to help run a new facility they're building outside Phoenix. The pay is double what you make here, full benefits, and they want you to help design the curriculum." Jake frowned. "I've never heard of any foundation like that around here." Neither had I, so I did some research. Turns out they're brand new. Just got incorporated 6 months ago. Williams slid a business card across the desk. "The Mountain States Emergency Training Foundation. They want to meet with you this afternoon." Jake stared at the card. Something about the timing felt too convenient, but he couldn't put his finger on why. "Did they say why they chose me specifically?" "They said they'd heard about your desert rescue and were impressed with your field experience. Apparently, they think you'd be perfect for developing wilderness emergency response programs." That afternoon, Jake drove to an address in Scottsdale that turned out to be a gleaming office building. The receptionist directed him to the 20th floor, where he was greeted by a woman in her 30s wearing an expensive suit. "Mr. Miller, I'm Jennifer Chen, Director of the Mountain States Emergency Training Foundation. Thank you so much for coming." She led him into a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the desert mountains. The view was spectacular, but Jake was more interested in the architectural drawings spread across the large table. "What you're looking at," Jennifer explained, "is our vision for the most advanced wilderness emergency training facility in the Southwest. We want to create a place where EMTs, paramedics, search and rescue teams, and even civilian volunteers can learn how to save lives in challenging environments." Jake studied the drawings. The proposed facility was impressive. Multiple training areas designed to simulate different types of emergencies, classrooms equipped with the latest technology, even a mock desert environment for practicing rescues like the one he'd performed. "This looks incredible," Jake said, "but it must cost millions to build." "We have the funding secured," Jennifer replied smoothly. "What we need now is the right person to lead the program development. Someone who understands both the technical aspects of emergency medicine and the real-world challenges of difficult rescues." "Why me? There are people with a lot more experience and credentials." Jennifer smiled. "Experience isn't just about years in the field, Mr. Miller. It's about judgment, courage, and the ability to make life-or-death decisions under pressure. Your actions in the desert demonstrated all of those qualities." As they talked, Jake found himself getting excited despite his skepticism. This was exactly the kind of program he'd been daydreaming about. The chance to teach other first responders, to potentially save lives by improving training. It was everything he'd ever wanted to do but never thought possible. "There is one condition," Jennifer said as the meeting wrapped up. "Our primary benefactor prefers to remain anonymous. They've requested that their identity not be revealed to program participants or staff." "That's fine," Jake said. "I'm more interested in the work than who's paying for it." "Excellent. We'd like to offer you the position of training director, starting next month. The salary is $80,000 a year to start, with full benefits and opportunities for advancement as the program grows." Jake almost laughed. 6 months ago, he'd been struggling to pay his bills on an EMT salary. Now he was being offered nearly double that to do work he was passionate about. "I accept," he said without hesitation. 3 months into his new job, Jake was happier than he'd been in years. The training facility was taking shape exactly as planned, and he was working with engineers and educators to develop programs that could revolutionize emergency response in remote areas. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite adding up. The foundation seemed to have unlimited funding. Decisions were made quickly without the bureaucratic delays typical of most organizations, and whenever Jake asked about meeting the anonymous benefactor, Jennifer would change the subject. The truth came out by accident. Jake was reviewing facility plans with the architect when his phone slipped out of his pocket. As he bent to pick it up, he saw a familiar name at the bottom of the architectural drawing. Rodriguez Technologies Building Division. That evening, Jake called Victoria for the first time since their conversation about the reward money. "Hello, Jake," Victoria answered as if she'd been expecting his call. "The training center. It's you, isn't it?" There was a pause. "What training center?" "Don't play dumb, Victoria. Rodriguez Technologies is building it. You're the anonymous benefactor." Victoria sighed. "How did you find out?" "Does it matter? The question is why. I told you I wouldn't take your money. And you didn't. You earned a job based on your qualifications. The fact that I helped create that job is different." Jake sat down heavily in his chair. "You manipulated the whole thing. I created an opportunity. There's a difference." Victoria's voice was gentle but firm. "Jake, do you like the work you're doing?" "Yes, but are you helping train people who will save lives?" "Yes. Then what's the problem? You're doing exactly the work you're passionate about, getting paid fairly for it and making a real difference in the world. The fact that I helped make it possible doesn't diminish any of that." Jake was quiet for a long moment. "Why didn't you just tell me?" "Because you would have said no. Your pride would have gotten in the way of doing something truly important." Victoria paused. "Jake, that day in the desert you taught me something I'd forgotten. That the most important things in life aren't about money or power. They're about being willing to help someone who needs it, even when there's nothing in it for you. So you decided to return the favor. I decided to invest in something worthwhile. In 6 months, your program has already trained 200 first responders. Last week, a team that went through your wilderness rescue course saved 3 hikers who got trapped in a flash flood. How many more lives will be saved because of what you're teaching?" Jake felt tears in his eyes. He thought about the faces of the EMTs and paramedics who'd gone through his programs. How eager they were to learn. How much they cared about doing their jobs better. You could have just built the facility and hired someone else to run it. But then it wouldn't have been about you. And this was always about you, Jake. About honoring what you did and who you are. A year later, the Mountain States Emergency Training Foundation had trained over 1,000 first responders. The program had expanded to include partnerships with hospitals across 3 states. And Jake had been invited to speak at emergency medicine conferences around the country. But the number Jake was proudest of was smaller. 47. That was how many lives had been directly saved by people who'd gone through his training programs. 47 people who were alive because he'd decided to help a stranger on a desert trail. Victoria still preferred to remain anonymous, but she and Jake had become genuine friends. She visited the facility regularly, often bringing her own employees for first aid training. She'd also quietly funded similar programs in 5 other states. "Do you ever regret not taking the money?" she asked during one of her visits. Jake looked out at the desert where his students were practicing rescue techniques, their voices carrying on the dry wind as they learned to save lives. "Never," he said. "This is worth so much more than money." Victoria smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that."